A thin glaze of frost coated the barbed wire like scattered salt, clinging in glitter to the small rusted hooks. The girl leaned against a fence post. Her body canted half an inch toward the open plain, head tipped onto her left shoulder. Her wrists were bound with a rope half burned through. The fibers blackened and curled, as if fire had licked them and gone out halfway. Between her fingers lingered the scorched smell of hemp. Her breath left her in a thin thread of vapor, breaking once before joining again. No shoes, just bare feet, pressed into dried mud, the crust cracked into small plates that clung to her skin. On the post beside her, a playing card, King of Diamonds, was nailed there with a rusty spike, its corners curled from frost, the paper stiff and withered, the red dulled to brick. The wind tugged once, and the card swayed slowly, making a dry sound like paper brushing teeth. Samuel Hayes pulled his horse to a stop. The animal's breath steamed. Dried sweat left salt crust along the saddle's pommel. He followed the fence line with his eyes to where the earth had been torn in a long furrow, dragged in from the trail, soil heaped into two ridges, a shallow groove between them marked with the frayed scrape of hemp rope. A set of wheels had been here, stayed long enough for someone to tie rope to the post, then rolled away. He sat his saddle a moment longer, unhurried. His gaze went from her wrists to the nail in the playing card, then down to a splinter of pale wood lying at the post's base, its surface scratched with crude, shallow marks, letters blurred. He didn't pick it up. The girl opened her eyes. Dark brown irises, the whites dimmed, as though dusted over. She looked at the rusted nail, then at her own fingers. The little finger of her right hand trembled in a steady, stubborn rhythm. Her lips were cracked to blood at the corners. She said nothing. Her face turned from the stranger's shadow, as if keeping distance from the sound of her own name. Samuel swung down from the saddle. The toe of his boot left a dark scuff in the frost. He brushed his hands on his coat hem, drew a folding knife from his pocket. It opened with a small, blunt snap. He slid the blade between two strands, turning it to find the lay. The edge rasped against hemp. The rope parted into two ends. The burnt portion dropped black dust into the mud. Her wrists sprang a trace of fresh blood, barely enough to stain, like a pen's first test mark. "All right," he said, without looking at her. His voice was flat. She didn't answer, just pulled black. It made no sound. The wind shifted, carrying a faint smell of ash, like a fire snuffed not long ago. Samuel glanced again at the furrow. At its edge was the mark of a small boot heel, pressed deeper than the surrounding soil, the spacing uneven. The tracks stepped back, then slid sideways, leaving a black smear, as though a hand had been dragged through ash. "Come," he said. She stayed where she was, her lips parted slightly, as if to test a word and swallow it. When he reached for her elbow, she flinched, pulling toward the fence. Her gaze flicked over the knife still open in his hand, then back to the card. The tremor in her little finger paused a breath, then resumed. Samuel folded the knife, put it away. He didn't touch her. He stepped around, took the reins, and brought the horse broadside to the fence to block the wind. "Come," he repeated, softer. She took one step, her left knee buckled. Her bare foot touched down, frost snapping brittle under her skin. Samuel offered his hand again, slower this time. She set her palm on his sleeve, not his skin. The warmth came through the cloth just enough for her to stand straight. They followed the fence toward the cabin. The wind still carried ash. By the path, a torn cloth sack hung on a low post, empty. A single red thread dangled from its corner, the end scorched, as if tested by flame. The horse walked slow. Each step broke frost under hoof with a soft, hollow crack. Behind them, the playing card still swayed, its sound lost in the wind. The cabin was small, its dark brown boards weathered, the window glass cross-scratched from years of sand. On the porch, a bare black iron hook jutted from the beam. The water chain from the well to the trough bore a white crust where it bent. Samuel pushed the door with his shoulder. The hinge groaned once, like a man breathing to stand. He didn't light the lamp immediately. Let his eyes take the dark before striking a match. Sulfur flared, yellow. In the kitchen, the rough wood table bore an old knife mark slashed across its surface. Beside it, a soot smear the width of a finger, darker in the middle. On the shelf, a tin cup lay mouth down. Samuel turned it upright, poured from a stoneware jug. The water fell in a short ribbon, rang thin on the cup's bottom, then stilled. He pushed it toward her. "Drink." She sat in a chair with one slat missing from the back. Both hands lifted the cup, the little finger still trembling, though less than outside. The water touched her lips. She drank like someone afraid it would vanish before she could swallow. Her throat worked, the pale skin showing a fine as kitchen smoke. She set the cup down a second time, letting go as if it weighed. Her eyes stayed on the door. Her pupils narrowed when the hinge squealed under a gust. Her wrists bore deep grooves like saw cuts in wood. Dried blood had hardened in dark flakes along the edges. On the back of her hand, near the thumb, was a long, pale scar, older than the fresh wound. Samuel noticed, didn't ask. His knife lay quiet on the table, blade shut, handle darkened by sweat. She glanced at it once, then at the door. Her eyes moved in short, trained sweeps. The smell of burnt hemp thinned, giving way to warm wood and the iron of water. In the corner, an old saddle leaned against the wall. A fine crack ran around its edge, the dry leather ready to flake like fish scale at a touch. "Does it hurt?" Samuel didn't give it the sound of a question. She lifted a shoulder faintly. Not a nod, not a shake, just enough to shift the pain. Her left forefinger traced the cup's rim. Light caught on her nail, then died. She laid her hand flat on the table, not touching the knife. The skin was thin, the green of a vein showing briefly. Samuel pulled open the drawer under the shelf. Inside, a roll of clean bandage, a curved needle, a paper-wrapped packet of white powder, and a sheet of paper folded in quarters. He didn't open the paper. He took the bandage, set it beside. The cup stayed where it was. She didn't reach for it, watching him as though waiting for an explanation. He gave none, only set the bandage close enough that she wouldn't have to lean forward. Then he stepped back. Wind pulled through the porch again, making the iron hook shiver once. The sound of metal against wood was like a spoon touching a cup's rim. She turned her head toward the door, her eyes dimming half a shade. Her breathing lengthened, slowed. Half the water still sat in the cup, the surface rippling from where she had set it down too firmly. By the table leg, a small piece of wood had slipped from her skirt pocket without either of them noticing. It fell softly, lying at an angle, its surface scored. Samuel bent to pick it up. Two unevenly carved letters were cut deep into it. M.D. The D had a corner broken off. He placed it on the table's edge, just beyond the lamp's reach. She looked at it for a very long second, her eyelids lowering and lifting again, as if cut by a knife. Said nothing. Her hand covered her right wrist more tightly, as if to keep something from falling out, braced against the broken slat chair back, her spine straight from habit that refused to lean. The tin cup stood before her, a second water ring overlapping the first, the two fitting tight, like paired age marks. On the table the MD scrap lay still, near the edge, shivering almost invisibly each time the wind sighed under the door. "Eat something," Samuel said. He took a small cloth bag from the cupboard, poured out a few hard biscuits and a fist of coarse salt. The biscuits struck the table dryly. The salt slid, leaving fine white streaks across the grain. She looked at them, but didn't reach. Her eyes went back to the door. There, Samuel's hat hung on its peg. Its shadow fell half on the wall, half on the door, split exactly along a crack in the wood's grain. A handspan away, a spare nail was driven in at an angle, its blackened shank polished smooth from use. Samuel took the roll of bandage, pulled an end free. The cloth snapped faintly. He sat opposite her, gesturing. She extended her hand slowly, fingers curling before they opened. When the bandage touched her skin, she paused a beat, then eased. He wrapped it around her wrist, each pass laid into the old groove, without covering the scabbed edges. After 3 turns he stopped, tied the knot. It sat off-center on the inner wrist so it wouldn't press when she lifted weight. She looked at it the way someone looks at a watermark on a stream bank. A sound on the porch, very slight, turned both their heads. Not hoofbeats. Only a dry branch, rolling across the boards, tapping the step before it stopped. Still, her eyes had already widened. She drew her hand back, clutching the bandage, as if it could hide more than a wound. "Anyone know the way in here?" Samuel said. Not a question. The words dropped like a pebble into a basin. The water in her cup quivered once, then stilled. She looked at the MD scrap, not at him. Her lips parted enough for a word to pass. It didn't. She pressed them shut again, turning toward the King of Diamonds outside, as if it were still in the room. A faint red bled along her lip, where the crack reopened under the pressure. Samuel stacked the biscuits neatly, not forcing her to eat. He took an old cloth, wiped the cup's rim where the well water had left a black line. The stain didn't vanish, spread into a gray bloom like soot. He set the cup back, its mouth facing her, his hand lifting away at once. She took it, drank again, less than the first time. When she set it down, a third ring overlapped the other two, its outer edge spilling into the old knife gouge across the tabletop. Beyond the glass, the sky dropped with her eyes until it was gone. Samuel stood. He went to the rack, where a worn wool blanket hung. He touched the fibers. They were dry, a little stiff. He laid it over the back of the opposite chair, not on her shoulders. Her breath eased, settling lower, her eyes going to the door less often for a moment. On the floor near the threshold was a dried mud print, its heel half a size larger than Samuel's own. It wasn't his. The mud clung thick along the board's ridge, enough to show whoever left it had stood there a long while, maybe leaning to listen inside. Samuel bent, tapped the print's edge with a fingernail. It broke into small, tight crumbs.
old, but not old enough to have turned to light dust. He straightened without brushing the wall. His expression didn't change. His eyes flicked once more to the MD scrap, then to the playing card beyond the crack in the door. She set her hand on the table, not covering the wood scrap, not pushing it aside, just there. The little finger still trembled. This time, when the tremor stopped for a heartbeat, her eyes met Samuel's. No plea, no thanks. A look laid down between them, like a weight that wouldn't be moved. The wind outside paused, then returned. The iron hook tapped wood again, soft as a gnat's wing. In the kitchen, the oil lamp burned steady, low enough to see, dim enough to leave things unseen. On the wall hung a coil of new rope, unused, pale yellow, without scent. Its shadow fell into the shape of a hook. Samuel lifted his own cup, drank. The cold water numbed his tongue slightly. He set it down beside hers, not touching. Between the two cups, the MD scrap lay still, the lamp's light broken across it into two uneven shards. Outside, the King of Diamonds still hung on its post, its edge trembling in the wind. No hoofbeats yet, but the quiet inside was strung tight as a bow drawn near its full reach. She glanced at the scrap once more, then away. When her eyes slid over the new rope on the wall, the tremor in her little finger stopped altogether for a longer beat. Her breathing shifted, drawing deeper. She pulled the wool blanket closer, not over her shoulders, but across her knees to warm her hands. The other hand slid along the tabletop, stopping where the old knife mark cut across. Her fingertip caught on the groove's edge, then withdrew. Samuel stood, signed to a thing that would arrive. The oil lamp's wick sometimes sent up a fine thread of smoke, then stilled. Outside, the King of Diamonds stopped swaying. It froze face up to the sky, the king's gaze meeting nothing. Inside, no one breathed hard. The tin cup bent their reflections out of shape, warped along the curve of its rim. A bead of water slipped from the rim, fell to the table, struck the old knife gouge, and stayed there, unspread, like a decision just placed and not yet named. "Someone's after you?" Samuel said it like laying a knife on the table without lifting his eyes. A rifle rested crosswise on the sill, safety still on. The steel bore the faint salt print of his old grip. The girl nodded, once, short. "3." The air in the kitchen dropped half a degree. The lamp on the shelf gave a small sigh, the flame drawing in. The cup's shadow stretched at an angle, cutting over the MD scrap at the table's edge. In the middle panel of the scratched glass, dust rose, thin then thick until shapes formed. 3 dust trails ran parallel, evenly spaced as though ruled. Samuel let the curtain fall. He didn't say hide or don't be scared. Those words didn't belong in his house. He only flexed his fingers, then reached for the Winchester. The bolt slid with a short, dry click. His eyes passed quick over what was in place. The folding knife shut at the table's corner, the cloth with its gray well-water stain, the roll of bandage neatly set, one rare white mark in a brown kitchen. On the porch, the iron hook trembled faintly, though the wind only licked the eaves. The sound threaded into the scrape of the water chain against the trough. The chalky streak at its bend showing clear as a line of powder. Samuel straightened, his shoulder grazing the door frame. Eyes passing the old bullet hole sunk deep in the porch post, round, rimmed in silver burn like a dry well mouth. She drew the worn blanket higher, but didn't wrap herself. Her right hand was bound in the fresh bandage, the knot lying to the inner wrist. Under it, a faint muscle tremor hummed like a string drawn tight and left unplayed. She held the tin cup in her other hand. The ring beneath it had stretched into a stain, feeding into the table's crosswise gouge. She didn't drink again. Her cracked lips showed a dry trace of red. "You planning to run?" she asked, her voice stripped of the question mark. Samuel heard it but didn't let it land. "Put on your boots." She bent for the old pair under the chair. The leather cracked, the tops peeled. She slid her feet in without looking at the laces. Her little finger stopped trembling for exactly one beat when her heel met the bottom. When she lifted her head, her eyes just left it as a reminder of what could still be carried. He touched the MD scrap with a fingernail. It didn't move. The letters stayed rough. He cracked the back door open a hand's width, testing the hinge, silent. For the span of one breath, neither looked at the other. They looked at the things where they were. The door frame, the trough, the saddle, the rope, the cup, the wood scrap. None of them spoke in their stead. Outside, the dust was nearer. 3 trails joined into one heavy cloud, rising to a man's knee. The hoofbeats shifted from hollow to ringing. A crow flew low, then veered toward the stone rise behind the barn. "If they come in, take the back way, along the rocks. Wind will be against them," Samuel said, his tone flat as water, untouched by wind. She nodded. Her hand set the cup down in the center of the old ring. The sound was soft at the start, hard at the tail. He turned. His hand tightened on the Winchester's forend, the skin stretching over bone, a pale lash mark crossing it faintly. He stepped onto the porch, leaving the door ajar. The peg on the post tapped once, like someone testing a bell. The yard swallowed the hoofbeats. 3 horses spread into a fan. The center one dragged a calf's carcass on a worn rope. Dust clung to the hide in gray patches. Blood had crusted dark where the skin tore. Flies hadn't found it yet in the cold. The rope's tail scraped the dirt in a slow, steady rasp. Samuel stood on the second step, not the last. The Winchester hung muzzle down, but his hands sat where it could lift in half a beat. His eyes cut once across the saddles, the oiled holster of the man on the left, the reins tied unusually high in the right-hand man's grip. He didn't meet their eyes. The man in the middle, thick gray coat, frayed collar, slid his glove down to show a faded blue hook tattoo near the wrist. He let the reins slip in his callous palm, the horse shaking its mane like shaking off a fly. In the kitchen, she heard the rope dragging the calf's body over a stone. Her face eased halfway, then drew tight again. She didn't look at Samuel. She looked at the thin crack between the door's planks where the yard light cut in. On the table, the MD scrap trembled invisibly, its shadow shifting half a nail's width in a wind. The lamp quivered. The wick's smoke ringed the air once, then broke. The tin cup caught a sliver of the yard, dust, the calf's dark line, a glint off a gun belt's edge. She tilted her head enough to change the angle of that reflection. On the porch, no one spoke. Samuel didn't either. A cold-season fly, stray, hit the calf's hide, dropped, circled twice on the dirt, then froze. The left-hand man moved his boot just enough to let its heel touch the old fence-post nail from the other day. The nail stayed firm. Samuel took off his hat, hung it up. Move was ordinary. The 3 outside watched without losing a beat. When the hat settled, the door hinge gave a small note. The wind had turned. The center man adjusted his reins by half a finger length, like locking a sentence unsaid. The dust eased enough to show the shine of oiled horse hooves. A spent cartridge lay in the sand at the bottom step, dull gold. Samuel's boot toe touched it as the wind cut across. The centerman lifted his chin, brim tipped back to show a narrow brow and pale gray, tired eyes. Thomas Garrett. A healed cut pulled his jawline slightly down. He looked at Samuel, then at the door crack for a beat. His mouth twitched, like tasting the metallic tang of old well water. The girl. 2 words. Bear. No bring. No return. But where those words fell, everyone knew where the thing itself was meant to go. Samuel didn't step closer. Back straight, shoulders loose, Winchester down. No. 1 word. Bear. No reason tied to it. The left-hand man, younger, high-cheeked, a chip in one front tooth, lifted the corner of his mouth just enough to show the flaw. You know the law. His tone was mild, like naming a market day. Mark Devlin wants his property. She's debt. The word debt fell into the yard and stuck in the dust. The horse on the right flicked an ear, pawed the ground. The rope on the calf scraped over a ridge, breaking the blood crust into black crumbs. In the kitchen, she heard it like hearing something called by the wrong name. Her lips moved 1/2 millimeter. No sound came. Her hand gripped the table's gouge as if catching the edge of something drifting. Her little finger was steady now, but her thumb lifted from the wood for 1 beat, then settled back. Thomas looked down at the calf. His face didn't change, but his throat moved once. He licked his lip, a habit from before either lying or striking. You know my boss doesn't like to wait. Samuel didn't answer. His eyes went to the knot on the middle horse's lead, a higher hand's tie, rushed, uneven, the rope's fray leaning one way, more violence than rein-work. He filed it in the part of his mind that kept the hard details. When they wait, Samuel said, voice flat. They like to drag something close enough for it to watch. The younger one smirked, flicking his eyes at the calf's carcass. Had a good enough look yet? Samuel didn't look back at him. His eyes went to the porch post, where the old bullet scar sat, then to the fence post, where the King of Diamonds had once been nailed. The empty nail hole held a single bead of water from the frost that hadn't yet, his trigger finger touching the rifle sling under a short coat. He'd done it so often he didn't have to look. A gust flipped the coat's hem, showing the frayed white lining at the collar's edge. Inside, the girl shifted her chair flush to the wall, quiet enough that the legs didn't scrape. She glanced at the back door, then at the Winchester in Samuel's grip. Her gaze moved from barrel to stock to the trigger guard, the same one that had once cut into a man's hand in this house years ago. Her chin dipped slightly, like weighing a thought. The man on the left cut in, not letting the pause grow thick. Name's Emma, isn't it? Can't change a name, Hayes. In the kitchen, she turned her face from the door crack. The 2 words hit the wall and fell to the floor without bouncing. Her eyes went to the MD scrap. It wasn't her name, but it stood closer to it than anything else in the room. Samuel didn't move. 1 shot. The younger man's brows rose. Huh? Enough so the next one won't lose the trail. Samuel stepped down 1/2 a tread. The old cartridge case by the step spun once under his boot toe and stopped, mouth up. He bent, picked it up, ran his thumb quick over the casing, feeling the rim worn smooth from being lifted too many times. Then he let it fall. The sound was neat, like flicking a bead onto wood. The horses twitched their ears. The middle one flared its nostrils, wind whipping grit onto the porch like a handful of sand. The calf's carcass bumped and settled, the rope scuffing the dirt into a lighter ring, salt surfacing as dried blood cracked apart. The young man to the left smiled again, chip showing hard. 1 hour. He spoke slow,
as if giving the word time to slip past the listener's teeth. Then, the boss comes. He turned his horse. The animal obeyed before its rider's body had moved enough to signal. They'd been together a long time. The right-hand man was half a beat slower. Thomas didn't turn at once. He stared a moment at the cracked door, like a man looking down an old well to see if there was still water. His throat worked. He swallowed something without taste. Samuel didn't follow. He didn't say, "Go," and didn't say, "Stay." His eyes tracked the hoofprints as they wheeled, each one leaving a flattened pedal in the damp earth. He counted 12 pedals for the 3 horses to turn half a circle. The middle horse kicked when the rope on the carcass snagged on a stone. The man on the left drew half his gun to smack the rope, then shoved it back, done as naturally as scratching an itch he couldn't reach. The boss, that word, lingered in the yard longer than silent. She sat where she had been, tin cup before her, the third water ring pushed out to the knife gouge. The MD scrap lay at the table's edge, ready to fall if nudged. "How long?" she asked, eyes not on him. "1 hour." She gave a slight nod as if she'd already arrived at that number herself. Samuel hung the Winchester back in its rack for an instant, then lifted it down again, not from forgetting but to recheck the angle. He opened the back door another hand's width to test the wind. The smell of hay from the barn came in, damp, faintly sour, edged with the breath of a fresh-worked horse. She stood, her chair moving no more than a finger's width. Her old boots left a fine trail of mud from under the table to the edge of the hide rug. She looked at it like a mark that shouldn't be there, then left it. From the low cupboard, she took a small cloth without asking, laid it on the table, didn't wipe the mud, wiped her hands. "You know them?" she said. Samuel touched a knuckle to the door frame, cool wood. "Enough to know the next ones will be cleaner than the ones that left." That part of the sentence didn't belong to her. She didn't take it. Her face stayed the same, only her eyelids lowered and rose again. She looked at the bandage on her wrist, not turned in. Her fingers pressed it, still tight. Samuel checked his rounds. Each one slid into the carrier like small bones laid straight in a square of earth. The click was as soft as a grain of sand into a bottle's neck. He placed 2 beside the MD scrap, then picked them up again like testing the table's balance. "Any other way out?" she asked. "There is," Samuel said. "Not on foot." She understood. A saddle needs a back that doesn't shake. Her eyes went to the saddle against the wall. The leather was cracked like a dry riverbed. She stepped close, brushed a fingertip over the split. The flake came away like fish scale. She pulled her hand back. The mud on her boot toe dried another shade. Outside, the wind shifted. The iron hook tapped twice. Birds lifted from the porch roof. Dry grass at the yard's edge leaned all one way. Dust on the trail thinned, then thickened again, like someone had added bodies to a story not yet finished. Samuel stood still a beat longer, then slung the cartridge belt and pulled the strap across his shoulder, folding knife into his pocket. Cloth tucked at the small of his back. He took the Winchester like a house object, not a weapon. She pulled the blanket from the chair, folded it in half, frayed edge turned in. Didn't take it with her. Slit remained, the width of a playing card. She watched the move, her lids pausing a fraction, didn't ask. Fresh dust rose like a low wall, denser, heavier than what 3 riders had left. The hoofbeats were dry, quick, even, like nails driven into long planks. Samuel set the Winchester across the porch post, the stock resting in the old bullet scar, the angle already set in his mind. His breath stayed even. His eyes measured the distance to the left-hand trough, a tin bucket upside down by its leg, the chain crusted white where it bent. A line of horses spilled into the yard, fanning like a fully opened blade. At the center, a black-coated gelding, tall, with a cropped mane. The rider's black coat hung clean, strange amid the smell of dust and dried blood. Mark Devlin needed no naming. His face was like a silver dollar long out of trade, cold, worn, shining where it shouldn't. His eyes never smiled, never had. He didn't look at the calf, didn't look at the dust flag wrapping the fence post. He looked at the porch step, where the Winchester lay across like a sentence already written. On either side, 6 men, short coats, pistols under, horses breathing white steam. Samuel counted without shifting his gaze. 4 on the left, 2 on the right, plus the 3 from before. 9. At the rear, Thomas Garrett sat half out of line, face scraped with dust, eyes moving like he was trying to find a door he could ride through. No one spoke. The iron hook on the post gave a shiver on its own. The wind turned, throwing up the scent of deer liquor and bath soap, the smell of places with brick walls and doormen. Devlin stopped at the edge of a comfortable range. He didn't touch his gun, just smoothed his gloves flat, slow. Thomas edged his horse a half-step forward, his mouth open, voice gritty. "Mr. D—" The shot cut him off. A spit of flame from the boss's coat, too fast to see the hand lift. The bullet took Thomas in the left shoulder, snapping his body like a pulled puppet string. He fell from the saddle, hit the dirt, left a dark stain spreading on the sand. His horse reared, the rein ring screaming in the bit. None of Devlin's men moved. No one drew a second gun. They watched like waiting for the next step of a sunrise. Dust settled around Thomas, showing fresh blood seeping through the old, red unnaturally bright in the gray day. He rolled half over, his good arm clawing for purchase. His lips worked like a thirsty man after dew. The first reversal lay there cold, the one doing the pressing now in the dirt, the violence meant for others, turned back on its own hand. No explanation. None needed. Samuel didn't shift his stance. The Winchester still hung muzzle down, but the lift was set in a single breath. Inside, the coarse curtain no longer stirred. The wind had gone still. From the rock rise behind the barn, a short crow call dropped and died. The porch boards swallowed Thomas's thin, needle-like groan, grinding it down to a grain of sand. Devlin spoke, thin, flat, like a pen nib scratching across stiff paper. "Filth doesn't need to speak." He slid the gun back into its holster, clean, precise, no wasted line. Then he looked at Samuel. Only looked. His eyes were cast iron, no glint, no challenge, just wait. His men spread, thinning the line. 2 drifted toward the left flank. 1 angled near the barn, his horse brushing the trough. A hoof tapped the overturned tin bucket. It rang hollow and short. Samuel tilted his head a fraction, logged it away. "Mr. Hayes," Devlin said, not to learn a name. "Word is you know how to keep still." There was a layer of mockery he didn't voice, only in the way his gaze passed over Samuel's shoulder to the things inside. The inverted tin cup, the half-dry ring on the table, the drawer left ajar. Samuel didn't answer. His tongue touched his teeth to be sure no words slipped early. He felt his knee set in the shallow dent worn into the porch post by years of someone standing there. "Get up!" one of the men barked at Thomas. He didn't. He looked to the porch, to Samuel, then across to Devlin. Whatever he had died between his teeth. He swallowed it dry. Devlin looked away. He lifted his hand, loosened a glove, smoothed the drape of his coat. Everything else froze with the movement, not by magic, but by the habit of those who'd learned to stop when he stopped. "We're here now," he said,
like announcing rain in its season. Time to talk. There were ways to talk, by chair, by bottle, by cash. Devlin chose the fourth, the eyes. They didn't fix on Samuel first. They walked the porch, over the bullet scar, the nail hole where the King of Diamonds had been, the trough's white crust, the tin bucket's mouth, and only then settled on the man's face. "You're holding something of mine," he said, no weight on the words. "You know that." "Someone," Samuel said, short, straight. Devlin flicked his chin toward the rock rise, where the headwind cut into thin lashes, where the honeycombed stone made a narrow shield. "You're holding my blood." He didn't say daughter, didn't say Emma. He said blood. The word landed like a hot iron brand into wet hide. The kitchen swallowed it whole, but out back a shadow shifted along the rocks. No voices, just the roll of a pebble stopping halfway. "Land, life, I take it," Devlin added, voice as calm as a debt already signed. His ringed hand drifted between them, the head etched with some faint, round mark. Silver gone down. "No," he said. Nothing else. A coil pulled tight in the air. On the right, a hand dipped toward a hidden grip and stopped. On the left, the chipped-toothed man's lip twitched. On the ground, Thomas's breath rasped up his throat like air through a bottle's neck. Devlin didn't flinch, didn't smile. He blinked once, audibly. "You know I don't say it a third time." "Then don't say it twice," Samuel answered. A seam in Devlin's coat shivered with the wind. He raised his hand to chest height, rolled the wrist. Behind him a man understood, moved to widen the flank, cinching the rifle's muzzle toward the porch like a noose. Two more angles pressed in that the eye couldn't measure. "What they did to her," Samuel said, not loud, not to anyone, just dropped it into the yard like a stone into a dry ditch. "You know?" Heads turned. Thomas stiffened. Devlin's crew waited. "I know enough," Devlin said, tilting his head a fraction. "Not enough," Samuel said. "Look at her wrist, the old crack in her left hand, the fine line behind her right ear. Product, torn." The word tore into Thomas like salt on raw skin. He pushed up on one elbow, clawing the ground. A few shifted forward, then held, pulled by an unseen line. Devlin's eyes neither narrowed nor widened, but a cord rose in his neck. Those close heard the hiss between his closed teeth. He didn't look at Thomas. He looked at Samuel, as if at a mirror that had thrown back the wrong face. "You hold my blood," he repeated, this time thinking, "and you set me a line." Samuel knew he was counting. Men, guns, the sun's climb past the porch beam. Wind, inches of water, the bucket's angle. He let him count. From the rise came a faint stone slide. A crow called short, once. Wind touched Samuel's face like paper. The skin at his neck cooled from ear to collarbone. Devlin dropped his hand. Done. The signal didn't show, but men moved. Two fell back. One slipped toward the barn. One eased close to the trough. The tin bucket tilted under a hoof. Samuel marked it. "Here," Devlin said, voice heavy as iron now. "Quick finish, no one likes long." He pulled his lower lip, caught a strip of dry skin, let it go. "You choose keep or you choose bury." The second word cost more than the first, laying a thin, cold shadow over the yard. The skin on Samuel's knuckles pinched at the pale lash mark from years back. He lowered the Winchester a notch, not yielding, only changing aim. "No," he said again. The word dropped, unbroken, without warmth. Took out two sticks, thick as a man's fingers,
the yellow of old fat, dust clinging. The dark green fuses were stiff, dry. A knife halved one, trimming the wick with a hand that had done it 100 times. Samuel's glance brushed the trough. The bucket lay mouth up, bottom ringed with old water stains. 3 strides away. The headwind would lick the fuse. If fire caught, it would feed just fast enough, half a beat slow, and it would blow in the wrong place. "Don't," a man murmured, not to stop him, just to be in the line. Devlin didn't answer. The match struck. Sulfur flared sharp. Wind pushed the scent away, but the fuse was already hissing, fire crawling the green like a live worm. The space between it and powder was shorter than a hand's width. He would count 10 heartbeats, throw to stone, take 2 breaths, then order fire. Samuel stepped forward, empty hand. The Winchester leaned against the post like a shovel before a dig. Half his boot sole left the porch, denting dust, his eyes fixed on the fuse, his mouth aimed for Devlin's ear. "Thomas tore your product." The word tore pricked the skin over Devlin's fire. He flinched. A vein wrote itself at his temple. He couldn't snuff the fuse. Fire had eaten half a finger's length. He threw. The stick spun, wind trying to bend its path. Samuel didn't wait to see it land. 3 strides cut the dust, his heels slicing it into strips. The tin bucket swung up one-handed, tilted forward, water lashing thin in the air. The act happened inside the breath it would take to shoot. Water met fuse when only a knuckle's length remained. A hiss, small, pinched by wind. White vapor burst like a horse's breath. The wick blackened, died. The stick dropped, rolled once, stopped with a hollow click. No one believed it for half a beat. Then a gun came up. Samuel was back at the post, Winchester in hand, muzzle raised to measure. He didn't fire, held Devlin's eyes so the crew would read their boss before they read a trigger. Devlin paused. A fresh stick lay in his other hand, fuse unlit. He looked at the damp one, smoking in the dirt, then at Samuel. The cord in his neck sank. His fingers pinched like crushing a fly. "You know fire and water better than me?" he asked, voice flat of anger. "No," Samuel said. "I know that knot on the left shoulder." He tipped his chin at Thomas. "And I know that mark didn't fall from the sky. It didn't draw a bullet. It drew eyes." All turned to Thomas, who was trying to sit, unable to rise. Blood from his shoulder soaked into the yard's dirty water, drying to a dark shadow. The jolt of truth hit the vein in Devlin's thinking. His eyes darkened, not softened, but deepened, like well water rich with iron. From the rocks came the trickle of falling grit. A Colt's glint winked at the edge, small as a fish's eye, enough for men who'd lived by gun to know someone there could read the wind. One man shuffled toward the barn wall. The shot came before his boot found its step, ripping the saddle's edge, dropping his gun to the mud. No one saw the shooter, only heard the wind's voice, clear enough to say the one out there wasn't guessing. Devlin didn't turn toward the rock rise. He never gave his back. His eyes slid past the dead fuse, as if over an insect's husk, then stopped on Thomas. "What did you do?" The question landed like a cleaver on a table, blade kissing wood. Thomas opened his mouth. No sentence came. Blood poured as if someone had opened a valve. Mud took it in, red to black. He looked at Samuel with the desperation of a drowning man trying to pull someone else under. Samuel didn't give him a hand. "Ask him," Samuel said, voice low, each word pressed even. "Ask his back. Ask the scar on his wrist. Ask the smell of burnt hemp." The air slackened as if a cord had been cut. Devlin's crew hunched shoulders, like a cold gust had slid inside their coats. They understood torn goods. They'd returned torn goods before,
but none wanted to be standing in that word when their boss heard it from a stranger. Devlin stepped down. The ground took his weight like stone takes a hammer. 2 paces to Thomas. The cloak's shadow cut across the blood, changing its color for an instant. He didn't kneel, didn't bend. He stood, drew, swatted the fly. The shot wasn't loud, but enough. Thomas's head turned with the force, his body folding like cut grain. Dust shifted a yard in another direction. Horses stamped. No one blinked. Samuel didn't rejoice. He counted positions again, 9 down to 8. The bucket lay tipped, water halved. The rock rise still held someone with rounds left. The wind still held against them. The Winchester's metal was cool under his hand. Devlin holstered without looking at the body. He looked up at the porch. His eyes deepened another shade, like a man finding something in his pocket he hadn't meant to touch, but knew he'd need. "I hate changing the plan, Hayes," he said, voice dry as a ledger cover left in the wind, "but you made me." "You came to the right place," Samuel said, eyes flat. "Not yet," Devlin answered. "The right place is that rock." His chin pointed to the rise, the spot he'd wanted to take with dynamite a minute earlier. "You tried," Samuel said. "Not a place for fire." He glanced at the bucket, then back. "That's a place for truth." Truth made 2 men's shoulders twitch, like cloth brushing bare kitchen. The oil lamp sagged once, black smoke standing before it dissolved. The drawer crack gleamed a thin line. The smell of last night's ash rose faint. The porch grains stood sharper under the cloak shadow. Devlin stepped toward the porch, 2 paces into range, if anyone had the mind. He didn't strip the glove again. He raised a bare hand, skin sallow from drink, not sun. Fingers long, nails cut close. "Bring me my blood," he said. "Keep whatever else you want, house, land, the calf's carcass. I don't take those. I take blood." Samuel heard the word blood spread across the yard like ink dropped into lime water. On the rock rise, someone's wrist skin tightened. Someone swallowed dry. "I keep the person," Samuel said, "not the blood." Devlin's mouth pulled to one side. His eyes, catching the bandage knot on Samuel's wrist, turned inward like the girl's. He said nothing. A narrow sunbeam cut under the eave, fell into the bucket's damp bottom. The glare bounced to the window frame, sliding over an old scratch. The water's voice was gone. Only the smell of iron and horsehide stayed. Samuel lifted the Winchester half a notch. He hadn't come to end it with a bullet. He'd come to keep a person from becoming property. The gun was just one word in that sentence. Devlin stepped back half a pace, not from fear, but to leave the porch shadow so the rock rise couldn't see the color of his muzzle when he signaled. He had laws for violence. They'd kept him alive. "I count to 10, he said. "At 5, my men press. At 10, whatever's not out blows." "Count," Samuel said. "But don't count alone." He began. 1. The crew's breathing pooled into one dark mass. 2. A left-hand horse shifted feet. 3. The cloak's shadow slid over old blood. 4. Samuel's wrist locked, fingers settling in the worn notch of the stock. 5. "Enough," Samuel cut in, like snapping a match before it struck. "You've heard what you needed to hear." Something in Devlin caught, a thin, hard-to-see thread, enough for his men to freeze their muzzles a half-joint short. Samuel lowered the Winchester, stepped onto the dirt. Hand open, shoulders loose, chin level, eyes straight. "You don't want to repeat 16 years ago," he said, dropping another stone in the ditch. "You let your blood walk out once. You came here to take it back. Call it what you like. But don't throw. Water's already spoken." The word water hit the dead fuse, the damp bucket, the white scum on the trough. It shifted faces just enough for one rifle to slip offline. On the rock rise, the Colt winked again. No shot, just a reminder that an eye up there was counting too. Devlin let out a breath longer than a word. Dropped his chin.
The rasp in his throat sounded like steel dragged on wood. "Fine. Enough. This time, enough." He tossed the live stick back into the pouch, signaled with one finger. Men stepped back half a beat, shifting aim from killing line to warning arc. He glanced at Thomas one last time, like a sprung trap not worth resetting. Samuel's shoulders stayed taut, eyes checking bucket, trough, rifle, rock. Everything where it should be, no change, just waiting. Devlin drew from his inner coat a thick envelope, light brown paper, edges square and clean. He balanced it on 4 fingers, thumb free, like weighing a stone with value. He didn't offer it. Not yet. He let it look at the porch a moment. "But," he said, thin as a blade already inside flesh, "don't let that card show up again." The word card hissed through the dry nail hole in the fence post in memory. Samuel knew the nail wasn't here. The hole was. Something in his chest made a slow lap like a horse pacing a tight pen. Devlin turned half away, never giving his back. He stepped up into the saddle as light as a man used to cold water. He didn't look at the rock rise. He didn't call a name. He kept them all in his eyes. "Not finished," he said, like drawing a last line on an unsigned ledger. "But today's enough." He signaled. The horses pivoted together, muzzles of guns turning like grass in wind. Dust rose wall-high again. The calf's carcass dragged a final loop, old blood breaking into new dust, red to gray. Thomas lay still, hand curled into an unfinished claw. By noon, mud would cover it. Samuel stood until the dust took the last black coat, Winchester down, bucket tipped, a thin ring of water on its lip, the trough's scum white as an unwashed face. The wind came back from the rock rise. From there, a shadow moved. A colt lowered. Stone stopped rolling. He didn't call out, didn't turn. The house stood as it had. The porch post locked the sentence in place. The drawer's crack pointed like a needle. The water ring on the table dried a little more. A pale salt edge, like a word left unfinished. Diamond's had been always dry, bright with a bead of sunlit salt, small as an eye just done crying. He gave her a small black cloth, the kind travelers tie across their faces when dust rises. She took it, didn't tie it, slipped it into her dress pocket. A loose thread caught, snapped. She freed it slow, like untying a knot that had been tied wrong. The crow's call from the rock dropped into the yard in 3 even beats. Samuel looked up. On the trail, dust compressed into a taller, darker column. The hoofbeats this time were dry as knuckles on bone. 1 hour, Samuel said, like driving a nail into a beam. She nodded, slower than before. Her little finger no longer shook. The old red line on her lip had not cracked further. They stayed silent. The lamp sent up one thin thread of smoke, then held still. The stove stayed cold. The ash smell returned, lighter, as if wind had lifted it from the stove's bottom. Samuel took another spent shell from the drawer, set it on the sill where light cut through the curtain. It threw a short glint on the window frame, like the second hand of a clock with no face. The MD scrap was gone from the table, but its dust print remained. She touched it, lifted a gray film onto her fingertip, rubbed it into the cloth at her knee. The gray vanished, the fabric darkened. Outside, the trail began to pack sound. The wind rose. The porch hook went still. The post stood unmoving, bullet hole round as an eye shielded before it opened. The nail hole where the king of diamonds had hung was full of dew. The bead swollen to the edge, not falling. "Rock path?" she asked. "When the lamp hits the lid," Samuel said, eyes still on the gray sky's edge, where the dust was thickest. She sat again, back straight, hands on her thighs, nails not biting skin, her eyes fixed on the doorway. Anyone looking in now would see two figures, one standing, one seated, between them the table, on it the water ring and the knife gouge. No words in between. Slowly, the dust shadow on the trail grew to the height of the barn roof. The hoofbeats linked, one to the next, like nails falling into a wooden box. The yard waited, the porch waited, the door waited, an hour short as the click of a safety. When the three riders came back the second time, they held the same distance. But their eyes had changed, no longer measuring range but reading intent, like someone else's shadow was standing behind them. The younger one bit the chipped place in his lip, the flesh paling before it sprang back. Thomas swallowed once, his throat rising, then went still. The right-hand man let his reins fall, his other hand pressing to his thigh, the move of someone afraid his hand might draw too soon. She didn't reach for it, just looked at him as if making the iron hook tremble once, the sound of metal brushing wood like a spoon against a cup's rim. She turned her head toward the door, eyes darkening by half a shade. Her breathing lengthened, slowed. The water in the cup was half gone, its surface still rippling from the force she'd set it down with. By the table leg, a splinter of wood had slipped from her dress pocket, without either of them noticing. It landed softly, lying at an angle, its grain scarred. Samuel bent to pick it up. Two uneven letters were carved deep into it. M.D. The D chipped at one corner. He set it on the table's edge, just beyond the lamplight's reach. She looked at it for a very long second, lowered her eyelids, then raised them again as sharply as a knife cut. She said nothing. Her right hand tightened over her wrist, as if holding something in place. Samuel stayed by the window for a while. An old scratch in the glass split the porch view into 3 slices. In the middle one, dust was settling. Further out, where the trail met a low rise, a dark speck moved slowly, like a stone rolling. It might have been a stray cow, or not. He didn't confirm. He just set his hand on the frame, feeling the cold dent where someone's grip had worn the wood. She sat sideways, her left shoulder resting against a broken spindle, her back straight from the habit of never leaning fully. The tin cup sat before her, a second ring of water overlapping the first, the two as tight together as 2 age marks. The wood chip lay still at the edge of the table. Whenever wind whistled under the door, it quivered almost imperceptibly. "Eat something," Samuel said. From the cupboard he took a small cloth bag, poured out a few hard biscuits and a handful of coarse salt. The biscuits hit the table with a dry knock. The salt slid, leaving a pale streak parallel to the grain. She looked at the biscuits but didn't reach. Her eyes went back to the door. On its inside, Samuel's hat hung from a nail. Its shadow fell half on the wall, half on the door, split neatly by a crack running the length of the grain. A hand's width away, A spare nail was driven in at an angle, its shaft blackened smooth from years of touch. Samuel pulled the bandage's end, the fabric snapping faintly. He sat opposite her, gestured. She extended her hand slowly, fingers curling in before opening. When the cloth touched skin, she flinched for a beat, then let go of the tension. He wrapped it around her wrist, each loop placed in the old grooves, never over the crusted blood. After 3 turns, he stopped, tying the knot on the inner side so it wouldn't rub wound.
"Anyone know the way in here?" Samuel said. It wasn't a question. The words fell like a small stone into a basin. In her cup, the water's surface rippled once, then stilled. She looked at the wood chip, not at him. Her lips parted enough for a word to pass, but none did. She closed them again, turning instead to the jack of diamonds outside, as if it still sat in the room. The skin at the edge of her mouth reddened faintly, a small crack opening from the pressure of holding back. Samuel stacked the biscuits neatly, not forcing her to eat. He took an old cloth and wiped the cup's rim where the well water had left a black trace. The mark wouldn't come clean, only blurred into a gray stain like soot. He set the cup back down, the lip toward her, and withdrew his hand at once. She drank again, less than before.
When she set it down, a third water ring joined the first 2, its edge spilling into the knife cut across the table's surface. Beyond the glass, the sky seemed to lower a shade. A flock of small birds shifted course toward the rock hills, leaving a gap of empty air over the trail. At the window's edge, a bead of dew crawled down, carrying dust with it, etching a thin line on the pane. She followed it until it disappeared into the wood seam. Samuel rose. He went to the rack where a worn wool blanket hung. He touched the fiber. It was dry, a little stiff. He placed it on the back of the opposite chair, not on her shoulders. She exhaled, her breath settling lower, her glances toward the door less frequent by a fraction. On the floor near the threshold was a patch of dried mud, the heel print larger than Samuel's by half a size. It wasn't his. The mud clung thickly, packed at the edge of the sill, as if the one who left it had stood there a long while, maybe leaning to listen inside. Samuel crouched, touched the edge with a fingernail. It crumbled into tiny grains, not old enough to turn to dust. He straightened without brushing the wall. His face stayed unchanged. His eyes flicked once to the MD chip, then to the jack of diamonds through the partly open door. She set her hand on the table, neither covering nor pushing away the wood chip, just left it there. Her little finger still trembled. When the trembling paused for a beat, her eyes met Samuel's, not asking, not thanking. A look like setting down a weight in the middle of the table, solid, unmoving. The porch wind stilled for a heartbeat, then returned. The hook's tap against the wood sounded again, small as a gnat. In the kitchen, the oil lamp still burned, low enough to hide as much as it showed. On the wall hung a coil of unused rope, pale yellow, scentless, its shadow bent into the shape of a hook. Samuel lifted his own cup, drank. The cool water numbed his tongue. He set it down beside hers without touching.
It clung to the post, its edge twitching in the wind. No hoofbeats yet, but the quiet inside had tightened like a bowstring drawn near its limit. She looked at the wood chip again, then away. When her gaze passed over the new rope on the wall, the tremor in her little finger stopped for a longer beat. Her breathing shifted, drawing deeper. She pulled the wool blanket closer, not over her, just across her knees to warm her hands. Her other hand slid along the table's edge, stopping at the cut in the wood. Her fingertip caught in it for a moment, then withdrew.